Dr. Bill Rice lived from 1912 to 1978, was an evangelist and a master storyteller, and in his book, More Thrilling Western Stories, he told my favorite of all of his stories. He said, my folks died when I was in my early teens, and I left the old home place in Decatur, Texas, and went back to the ranch country where I'd been born, lived with my widowed sister Ruth on the Graham Ranch in Texas. She taught school in a two-room schoolhouse. She and her three little boys and I lived in one room. She taught school in the other, and I drove her car the 10 miles every day to finish high school. When my school days were over, I wanted to go to college, but I had no money. It was during the Great Depression. From every standpoint, my desire to go to college seemed hopeless, but I was determined to go and hoped to go to Decatur Baptist College, where other family members had gone, so I sent in for an application and signed up for the fall term. I packed up my meager clothes in an old battered valise and shipped it to Decatur, Texas. One morning before daylight, I went down to the corral, roped and bridled a beautiful horse, put a borrowed saddle on her, led her outside the corral. I mounted, waved a silent goodbye to the sleeping ranch, and turned the pony's head to the east and Decatur Baptist College over 100 miles away. I left before breakfast. I didn't have a single penny with which to buy lunch, and I had no supper. Through the long, hot hours of the day I rode, sometimes I followed the highways, sometimes I cut across the prairie. Most of the time my horse maintained a smooth foxtrot, and we covered a surprising number of miles, but they were not happy miles. The afternoon was long, hot, dusty. I was tired and hungry. I was scared, and my heart was filled with bitterness. I'd been a, quote, Sunday school boy all my life. What had it got me? Almost all my friends danced, drank liquor, and smoked, and I'd never done those things at all. I had kept myself morally clean. My father had left me a little money when he died, but a, quote, good Christian had borrowed it, and now they would not pay it back. Here I was, an orphan boy in the midst of the Great Depression, without a home, a meal, or a penny. I told everybody I was going to college, but how could I without a job and without money? I grew more bitter and backslidden in my heart as the day drew to a close, and along toward evening, I became aware of dark storm clouds gathering overhead. Lightning flashed, thunder rolled, my bitterness increased even more. Presently, I noticed a large farm home with fine barns on the left of the road, and turned my horse's head up the lane, approached the front yard gate, and it began raining as I hollered the customary, "Hello." A gray-haired man appeared on the front porch and answered, "Hello yourself, get down." I dismounted, walked down the path to meet him. "I'm on my way to Decatur where I'm going to college. It's going to rain in a few minutes. If you don't mind, I'd like to sleep in your barn tonight." The gray-haired man assured me he didn't mind me sleeping in his barn. Then looking me square in the face, he asked, "What did you say your name was, son?" I said, "My name is Bill Rice." Then the old man said, "Are you any kin to the Senator Will Rice?" When I told him that Senator Will Rice was my father, the old man was delighted. Turning toward the house, he called out in a loud voice, "Ma, oh Ma." And when a lovely gray-haired lady appeared at the door, he said, "Ma, this young man is the son of Senator Will Rice. He's going to stay all night with us. Get the victuals back on the table." The dear lady ran down the path to meet me and told me she was so glad I'd come their way. She asked if I was hungry, and I told her I sure was. The man and I went to the barn where we unsaddled my horse and gave her fresh water and oats and hay. In Proverbs 31:26, speaking of the virtuous woman, we read it with me, would you please? "She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness." Ephesians 4:32 is one of the most important commands in the Bible to all of us. Read it, please. "And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you." I want to speak to you tonight on the subject, how to use the power of kindness. You could also call this the life-transforming power of kindness. Many people think of kindness as a weak, wimpy sort of a thing that everybody should use sometime, and most of us should use a little bit more than we do. But I would like to challenge you tonight to recognize kindness as a powerful force that emanates from the hand of God Himself, that will transform your life and the lives of those around you if you will use it properly and consistently. So what are some ways in which you can and should use the power of kindness? Number one, use the power of kindness to enhance your own personal testimony. There's a very interesting verse that I rarely ever used in preaching, but it is an amazing verse. It's Proverbs 19:22 that says, the desire of a man is his kindness. Let me tell you what I believe that verse means. The thing that makes a person a desirable person to be around is that person's kindness. Kindness in someone's personality and attitude makes it easy to be around them and removes the need for us to throw up our defenses. You ever get around somebody and you've only been there a few seconds and you feel like you need to go like this? You know what I'm talking about? What kindness wipes away the uneasy feeling of the other person in some way being a threat to you. Kindness was what the children and their mothers felt. I've got lots of pictures of Jesus and the children, but that is honestly my favorite of them all. It's what the children and their moms felt when they wanted to be around Jesus. He easily held and touched and blessed the children. And kindness will make you handsome or lovely, whether your face is very attractive or not. I need some help in that area. I don't know if anybody here needs any help in that area or not, but it'll help if you need it, all right? Kindness will cause people to admire you and respect you, and it will catch people's attention if you will simply wear the clothing of kindness. My wife and I were on a flight, and I was reading a book and fell asleep. Ray Jean reached over, took the book, gently covered me with a blanket. And after I woke up, the man sitting on the other side of me leaned over. I'd already talked to him, witnessed to him, and he leaned over, looked at both of us and said, I saw what your wife just did, and that was the kindest thing I've ever seen. When I first started preaching this message, I gave it several times, and my wife kept saying to me, honey, that is such a weak story. And I said, but honey, that's the whole point. It doesn't take very much to impress people with kindness. Now, sometimes we humans are kind, sometimes we're not. But our God is consistently kind, always kind, never unkind. 5 times the Bible refers to God as a God of great kindness. And Luke 6:35 says that God is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. You got anybody around your house looks like that? God is being kind to us even when we don't recognize it. God was kind to Jonah when he sent the whale to swallow him. And God was kind to Nineveh when he sent Jonah to preach to them and warn them that they were about to be destroyed. Jonah was exceedingly displeased and very angry when God was so kind to Nineveh and did not destroy them, but that did not change God's kindness. Jesus didn't condone the sin of the woman taken in adultery, but he was still very kind to her. 4 times in Psalm 107 we're told, oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness. So we rightly say that, read it with me please, God is good all the time. But that same Hebrew word translated goodness is also translated kindness, so we can also rightly say, read it please, God is kind all the time, all the time. God is kind. And since God is always kind, it's a godly thing to be kind. It's an ungodly thing to be unkind. And anytime you or I act in an unkind manner or speak unkind words, we hurt our testimony and make ourselves look ungodly and ugly to other people. Proverbs 31:26 again. Read it with me, please, all together. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. Would you stop and think for just a minute how many laws we would not need if all of us would just obey the law of kindness? Can you imagine how different this world would be if every person in the world was kind to every other person in the world for one full 24-hour day? You wouldn't need the police that 24 hours. You wouldn't need the military for that 24 hours. Now watch my hands here. A law sets parameters. A law draws boundaries. And the law of kindness is you must not go outside the boundaries of kindness anytime you speak, anytime you act. Pick out a day, any day. Do it today, do it tonight, do it tomorrow. Decide ahead of time that every word you say will be kind, and the way you say them will be kind. I'm telling you, this is a challenge. Read it off the screen, please, everybody. If I'm going to obey the law of kindness, then my words must be kind, and the way I say them must be kind. Set a goal to not break the law of kindness in any way for one full 24-hour period. Then do it again and again until it becomes a habit ingrained in your mind and in your soul. A year and a half ago, I was in Big Sandy, Texas, and preached this message for the very first time. That's me on the platform. That's the three boys in the back that I tell the story about. The next day, after I gave this message, their mom came up to the table and said, Pastor Davis, could I tell you a story that happened after you gave the kindness message last night? I said, yes, ma'am, I'd love to hear it. She said, well, it made a big impact on my three boys. And when they came back to the room, they said, Mom, we need to take his 24-hour challenge. Starting at midnight tonight, we're going to be nothing but kind to each other for 24 hours straight with every word we say and the way we say them and the way we act. And she said, boys, this is wonderful. She said, we were up really late that night, and at 12:01 a.m., I heard the boys fighting in the other room. She said, I went in the other room and said, boys, what happened? I thought you were going to be nothing but kind to each other for 24 hours straight. She said, they looked at me and said, Mom, this is harder than we thought it was going to be. Now, here's what you have to do. Continually over and over, do an instant replay in your mind. Those words I just said to my wife, were they kind words? Was the tone of my voice kind? How would I feel if she spoke to me with the same words or the same tone of voice? Instant replay. Those words I just said to my husband, were they kind? Was the tone of my voice kind? How would I feel if he spoke to me with the same words or the same tone of voice? Those words I just said to my son or my daughter, to my brother or my sister, were they kind? Was the way I said them kind? Now, our problem is this, folks. So many of us have broken the law of kindness so many times that it's like running a stop sign so many times that you just run it and don't notice that you ran it at all. May I ask you, are you kind when you're on the telephone? Are your Facebook posts kind? Are your texts kind? Are your emails kind? When you say goodbye on the phone, what does it sound like? Does it sound like goodbye, or goodbye, or goodbye, or maybe you don't say anything at all, which I think is rude, but I'm not the referee or the coach for all things manners. But did you ever stop to think that whatever you say when you say goodbye is the last impression you leave on that person, and you want to leave the impression of kindness? When I'm talking to a family member, I always try to say, love you, goodbye, because I never know when it's going to be the last time I speak to that person, and I want them to know that was the last thing I said. Over a period of several days or weeks, repeatedly ask your mate or your children, were those words I just said as kind as they should have been? God's been working on me with this, and there's been several times I've had to stop and say, you know what, children or grandchildren, or to my wife, she's back there tonight, you know, that wasn't as kind as it should have been. My children have been teaching my grandchildren this, and one of my little grandsons, 2 years old, said to his 3-year-old sister, "Sissy, that was so kind. Thank you for being so kind to me." Dads, when you pray for your family, pray for everyone to be kind to each other. Parents, when you correct your children, ask them this: did you break the law of kindness? School teachers here, one of the things you can say to the children in your classroom if you have to deal with a problem is, now let me ask you, did you obey the law of kindness? Did you break the law of kindness? Now please understand me here. I'm not saying that you cannot ever have any fun with your family and your friends. But you have to make sure that whatever fun you have doesn't break the law of kindness. Sometimes a little teasing can add a touch of spice to life that will actually draw you closer to other people. Some of my children and grandchildren were at our house, and we were having pizza with jalapeno slices on top of it. Hey, hello, hello, hello. How many of y'all like that? Let me see your hands. All right, amen. Not many people in your church, preacher, not many, just a little handful. Anyway, one of my grandsons, David, started taking his off, was about to throw them away, and I said, "David, don't throw those things away. Save those for me." Then I grinned and said, "Some folks are just too wimpy to handle it." A little while later, I took a bite of one of those things, and it was one of the hottest jalapenos I ever put in my mouth. It set me on fire. I said, "Whoa, whoa, that's really hot. Give me a drink quick." And my grandson grinned and said, "Too wimpy to handle it, huh, Grandpa?" Now, a little bit of spice can make the meal of life taste better, but you can hurt people with unkind words such as, "Hey, Big Nose, you ever thought about starring in a Pinocchio movie?" I've been around some people, and it's like the theme of their life is, if you don't have anything to say, say it anyway. Just make it funny. It'll be all right. But it's not all right. The test of all humor is this: does it break the law of kindness so that it damages my relationship with others instead of building that relationship? The law of kindness is a good law. You break a good law, there can be bad consequences. In 2 Chronicles 10, King Solomon had died. His son Rehoboam had ascended to the throne of Israel. And the young king sought the counsel of the old men who had counseled his father. He asked them how he should respond to the people. And they spake unto him, saying, "If thou be kind to this people, and speak good words to them, they will be thy servants forever." But Rehoboam's younger friends gave him opposite counsel. And 6 verses later we read, "And the king answered the people roughly." His words were rough. The way he said them was rough. And the kingdom of Israel split in half, a breach that has never been repaired in history, because a young king used rough words instead of kind words. Rehoboam broke the law of kindness, and it cost him half his kingdom. May I ask you, is it going to cost you your family because you keep breaking the law of kindness? Is it going to cost you your marriage? Is it going to cost you your children? You say, "Well, what do I do on those days when I just don't feel like being kind?" You don't stop at a stop sign because you feel like it. You stop because you're supposed to. Hello, somebody say amen. In fact, one family heard this message and said, "We're going to, every time from now on, when we see a stop sign, we're going to use that as a reminder to stop our unkindness." In Colossians 3:12, we are commanded to put on kindness. Maybe every morning when you put on your shirt or your blouse, you should consciously say to yourself, "I'm putting on my kindness now." And then don't take off your clothes just because somebody makes you mad. I promise you, that every day you wear the clothing of kindness, you will be the best dressed, most attractive person anywhere around. Read it with me, please, everybody. Love makes you, and kindness makes you likable. Use it to enhance your testimony. Number 2, use the power of kindness to make a positive impact on other people's lives. Psalm 36:7 says, "How excellent is thy loving kindness, O God. Therefore, the children of men put their trust under the shadow of thy wings." The kindness of our God is so excellent and so loving that it makes a powerful impact on us that causes us to trust Him. You don't trust somebody who's unkind to you. You don't trust a bully or an angry person, but you trust someone who is consistently kind. You think the man who fell among the thieves would have trusted the Good Samaritan who rescued him if the injured man needed him in the future? While others walked on by, the Good Samaritan took the time to treat the man's wounds, take him to an inn, pay somebody else to care for him when he had to leave. Sometimes you have to go out of your way to be kind. Sometimes it's an interruption to your schedule to be kind. It may cost you money to be kind. Be kind anyway, because it may make a powerful impact on someone's life. These are the actual pictures of the people involved. December of 2014, a desperate grandmother named Helen Johnson went to a Dollar General store here in Alabama. This is the first time I preached this message in Alabama. Somebody here might remember this story, all right? She had $1.25 to her name. She had herself and 5 children in the house, and they'd already gone 2 days, no food. She tried to buy some eggs. She was 50 cents short, so she stuffed 5 eggs in her jacket pocket and later said, "Of course, when I put them in my pocket, they broke. I'm not a good thief at all." William Stacy was the first police officer on the scene, and when he found out what happened, he talked to the store, then went inside and bought a dozen eggs, came out and gave them to Grandma Johnson. She tried to pay him by offering him the $1.25, but he wouldn't take the money. The officer gave her a hug and left, and a bystander made a video of the whole thing and posted it online, where it went viral, and thousands of people were touched by the kindness of a cop, including the President of the United States, who told the story nationwide. Somebody said, read it with me please, kindness is a universal language that the and the mentally slow can understand. While we're blind and deaf and lame people crying out to Jesus or walking right up to Him, they sense the kindness in the heart of the Son of God that made Him so approachable. Now we think of anger as powerful, but kindness is more powerful. What if that story were different? What if the cop had angrily, roughly cuffed that grandma and hauled her away? He could have. But the kindness made the story a more powerful one than if the cop had used anger. It is not always possible to please everybody. It's not always possible to meet everyone's expectations, but we should always do our best to be kind. A word of caution here. Kindness is so powerful that sometimes it's used to manipulate people the wrong way. In Genesis 34:3, Shechem used kindness to deceive Dinah. And so many girls in our day are starving for some male kindness. When they don't get it from their daddy, then they go looking for it anywhere they can find it. But every man who is kind to you is not necessarily the one for you. Somebody say amen there, all right? Number 3, use the power of kindness to solve or prevent family problems. The only mention in the Bible of the law of kindness is in the passage that tells about the virtuous woman's relationship with her husband and her children. And there's probably no other area where consistent kindness is as badly needed as it is in the home. Charity or love is kind. One of the tests of true love is whether it is kind or not. Somebody said, read it please. No matter what, be kind. Now some men would say they love their wives and tell them that they love them, but if you say, darling, I love you, and 5 minutes later you do or say something unkind to her, your actions will cancel out your words. The opposite of kindness is unkindness. The opposite of love is hate. Anytime we're unkind, we communicate hatred to the people we are dealing with. Kindness is catching. It's contagious in a good sort of a way. Two unkind people are always fighting. One kind person, one unkind person seldom fight, and two kind people almost never fight. My family and I, several months ago now, actually 3 or 4 years ago, we're in a buffet restaurant where they have one of those big chocolate dessert fountains. And am I making anybody hungry right now? We were, wisely or unwisely, sitting close to that fountain. In case you're wondering, I like to sit close to them, even though I'm allergic to dark chocolate. At least I can dream about it. I got to do that this afternoon with the pastor and his family. Anyway, we're going there tonight again, right? Yes, good. Okay, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I heard a commotion, and I looked up to see a mother confront her 8 or 9-year-old daughter. The daughter had chocolate on her face and her hands, and the mother started screaming so loudly she could have been heard over most of the restaurant. She was screaming, "Get in that bathroom and wash that chocolate off your face now!" My mind immediately did 2 things. First of all, I look forward a few years to when that little girl will be a teenager. I can see her in trouble, and the mother opens her mouth and screams again, and the girl just walks away and does whatever she wants to do. Daddy, Mom, it's not the chocolate on the face and the hands. Today it'll be chocolate. Tomorrow it'll be something completely different. It is your response to the chocolate. Then I thought how that mother could have handled that situation. You know what she could have done? She could have stooped down in front of her little girl, taken her by the elbows. I'm not sure there was another way to take her, all right? And looked her right in the eyes. Now, folks, you are not communicating with your children unless you're looking them in the eyes and they are looking you in the eyes. One reason lots of people have problems with their children all the time is because they never slow down long enough to look them in the eyes. Especially, you need to eat meals together and look each other in the eye, turn off all the devices, put everything else aside, and look each other in the eye when you're eating a meal together. You need to do that at least once a day, preferably 2 or 3 times a day if you're able to do it. So she could have looked her in the eyes and said, "Darling, we have a little problem here, don't we? Now, Mommy's going to take you to the bathroom, and we'll get you cleaned up and come back out. Do not go up to the chocolate fountain again without Mommy being with you. Say, 'Yes, ma'am, Mommy.' 'Yes, ma'am, Mommy.' 'Okay, let's go take care of this problem.'" And they could have taken care of it, and it would have been over with. Now, so many homes have been so filled with unkindness for so many generations that it's like we keep passing the unkindness on to our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Read it off the screen, please. The test of... I had given my key message on parenting, which is the 3 key elements of successful parenting, in a church in Arkansas. The pastor came up to me after the service. His dad was standing right behind him when he said, "Brother Davis, could I tell you why my brother and I have always admired and respected our dad?" I said, "I'd love to hear it." He said, "When we were little boys, my dad was in the driveway washing his car by dipping a sponge in and out of a bucket of soapy water. Mom called Dad into the house for something. When Dad came out, my brother had decided he would help Dad wash the car. but he didn't use a sponge. He was using steel wool. He was dipping the steel wool in the soapy water and washing the side of Dad's car with it, and Dad did not explode. Dad gently corrected my brother's mistake, and life went on. And I looked at this older dad standing there and saw the tears of love in his eyes and knew immediately why both of his sons loved and respected him. By the way, it could have been a big rock the child was using. The child thought he was helping. Kind correction was the only proper response. May I tell you, there's never been the paint on the side of a car as valuable as the heart of your child. That car is probably sitting in a salvage yard somewhere rusting away, but Dad's kindness may last for generations to come. Everyone cannot be wealthy or famous. Everyone who will can be kind. Better to be known as a kind father than a wealthy father. Many wealthy fathers have rebellious children, but a consistently kind father is not as nearly likely to have rebellious children. You're not going to be happy in your old age because of how much money you've got in the bank. You're going to be happy because your children and grandchildren love you and want to be around you. Read off the screen, please. One of the important things any parent can do is to tie heartstrings with their children. God uses kindness to reach our hearts and cause us to want to respond to Him. And few things are as effective to reach the hearts of your children as simply, consistently being kind. And if you fail, then ask for forgiveness and start all over again. Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 2 indicates that youth is the time to learn kindness. And one family wrote about what they do to teach their children to be kind. When my brothers and I were growing up, my parents implemented a neat tradition called Secret Angel, which I've now started in our home. Every Sunday night we pass around a little bowl with each of our names on a folded up piece of paper. The concept is simple. Throughout the week, each family is tasked with demonstrating the love of Christ to that person. Maybe it's offering to take his or her plate from the dining room table to the kitchen, or volunteering to do the other person's household chore, or making a card, or giving the other person a welcome foot rub. Oh, that looks good, Regine. The following Sunday night, we have to guess who our secret angel was. And the trick is to be so kind to so many family members that everyone thinks you were their secret angel. When we catch someone in the act of being kind to us, we will jokingly ask, "Are you my secret angel?" And our oft-repeated response is, "Wait and see, it's a mystery." Number 4, read it please. Use the power of kindness as a weapon to defeat bitterness, anger, envy, and vengeance. One of the kindest people in the Bible was the widow lady named Ruth. 3 ladies in the book of Ruth had all lost their husbands, Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah. But Naomi had lost her husband and both of her sons. Ruth stayed with her bitter mother-in-law Naomi while sister-in-law Orpah walked away. Ruth's kindness brought out kindness in kinsman Boaz, which caused Naomi to realize that it was really the kindness of God they were all experiencing. Naomi said to her, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." Now that is very interesting. You ever think about a message on how God is kind to the dead? That's interesting, isn't it? God not only used Ruth's kindness as an antidote for the poison of Naomi's bitterness, He also used the kindness of Ruth to properly catch the eye of Boaz, who shortly thereafter went to the gate of the city and contracted to marry Ruth. Boaz said, "Blessed be thou the Lord, my daughter, for thou showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning." Ruth just kept being more and more kind as the story progressed. When you're dealing with people who are having problems, you don't give up being kind. You increase the level of kindness. Over 40 years ago, as a young pastor, I remember receiving a telephone call that a single mother had just lost her teenage daughter in a terrible car accident. That teenage girl was her mother's whole life. I preached the funeral, tried to comfort the mother. She would not be comforted. I remember visiting her after the funeral. She was so bitter and angry and harsh that I thought she didn't want me around, so I didn't go back. A couple of years passed. One day I was out going door to door witnessing to people, was surprised to have this lady answer the door of the house that I knocked on. We talked for a while, and then she leveled both barrels at me. She said, "You don't care anything about me. If you had cared about me, you would have kept coming to see me after my daughter died." I tried to tell her I did care, but it didn't do any good. Finally, I said to her, "Marcia, I'm going to keep coming to see you, and you will know that I do care." For the next 35 years, there was no lady in our city or county who my wife and I visited more than we did Marcia. Over and over again, we went to her house. My wife probably became her best friend. In all those years, I think we only got her to come to our church one time. We just kept going back. She had trouble coming to our church because it brought back too many memories of her daughter who had been in our church. My wife and daughters cleaned house for her. They cared for her after she left the hospital one time. We had her at our house for Thanksgiving. She didn't have hardly any family. It was about 30 years after the death of her daughter that we went to Marcia's house one day, knocked on her door. She comes to the door. She looks at my wife and I, and she says, "Pastor, Regine, come on inside. I've got something wonderful to tell you." She had the biggest smile on I ever saw in all those years. We walked in, we sat down, and she said, "Last Sunday, I went to Latham Baptist Church and I got saved while I was there." And we just rejoiced with her. We had witnessed to her over and over and over again to the point that our presence, we just were loving her, but we were thrilled. A few weeks later, we came back and she said, "I got baptized last Sunday." And we just rejoiced with her and we just kept going back. It didn't matter where she went to church. She was just ours for life. I mean, that's the way it was going to be. One day she looked at me and she said, "Pastor Davis, I don't really have any family. I'm leaving almost everything I have to your church." And after I stepped down as pastor, Marcia died and was buried while I was traveling and away from home. I felt terrible. One of the worst things about being in evangelism, after having been a pastor all those years, is that I've missed so many funerals. But anyway, I went by the cemetery one evening, but several months later, actually, it was a little over 2 years after I stepped down, our church received a check from her estate for almost $40,000. Marcia was so bitter that I didn't understand. She did not need the absence of my presence. She needed the presence of my kindness. God used His kindness in my wife and family to help conquer her bitterness, because kindness makes an impact on people's lives. Generally speaking, probably the most strained relationship of human life is the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship. We saw it a while ago with Naomi and Ruth, and we hear about it all the time in our ministry. I got a call this afternoon, somebody I need to call back, and I already know where that telephone call is going. This lady is not going to have a relationship with any of her children's mates. I mean, it's just, she's just setting herself up. She's setting herself up to be a terrible, terrible mother-in-law. After my wife and I were married, and since we're not in a hurry tonight, there's my wedding picture 49 years ago. I'm going to take time and go back and kiss my wife, and any of you guys who want to, you can kiss your wife while you're at it, all right? Woo! I'll preach better the rest of the service, all right? After my wife and I were married, my wife and my mother had some conflicts. And there's a picture of my mother at my wedding. And my wife was talking to her mother about the problem. And her mother said to her, Regine, I'm going to tell you what you need to do. Yes, Mom, what is it? Regine, you need to kill your mother-in-law with kindness. That's what you need to do. And Regine did it, and it worked. My wife became like a daughter to my mother. In fact, my mother at one point said to my wife, you are just like a daughter to me. Ephesians 4:31 gives a list of some of the biggest problems in our world today. Would you look at that? Bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, evil speaking, malice. But the next verse gives the solution to those problems. And be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Be ye kind. And a truly kind person is also a tenderhearted and forgiving person. Kindness, tenderheartedness, and forgiveness are a trinity of graces that will defeat almost any bitterness or anger in your own life or other people's lives. By the way, everybody, look at the screen right now, would you please? Because everybody in this room tonight is either living in verse 31 or you're living in verse 32. If I were to ask your husband which verse you're living in, what would he say? If I were to ask your wife which verse you're living in, what would she say? If I were to ask your parents, if I were to ask your children, which verse are you living in, what would they say? I encourage you, is your life filled with bitterness and anger or kindness and forgiveness? I would really encourage you, memorize Ephesians 4:32. I take my grandchildren, and this is two of my newest grandchildren, and I take them on walks. And or we'll go and I got a Kawasaki mule, and we live in the country. We'll go on rides on the mule, and we'll sing as we go. Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted. And we just sing that. I want them to get that in their mind. Kindness will replace anger. Try to be angry and kind at the same time. You cannot do it. Lots of people will get our anger series and they'll pray, God, please take this anger away from me. That's good. But what you need to first pray is, God, help me to be kind with my words, my attitudes, and my actions. Listen to me. You can be firm and still be kind. You cannot be furious and still be kind. You can be intense and be kind. You cannot be indignant and be kind. You can smile and be kind. You cannot scream angrily and be kind. You can rebuke and be kind. You cannot be rough and be kind. Psalm 141 verse 5, let the righteous smite me. It shall be a kindness. Let him reprove me. It should be an excellent oil which shall not break my head. I thank God for all the times in my life when I was rebuked and reproved because I needed it. But I'm especially grateful for those times when somebody did it with some kindness. The spoonful of sugar, the kindness helped the medicine, the reproof, to go down. There is a world of difference between kind reproof and caustic reproof. Remember this, say it again please. If you're unkind, you're the wrong kind. Kindness reduces problems and tensions and creates a wonderful atmosphere in the home or church or business where kindness prevails. May I ask you, is the atmosphere in your home a spirit of kindness or a spirit of conflict? Kindness is not indulgence. It's not always giving people what they want, it's giving them what they need. It is not unkind to discipline a child. You just have to make sure that there is no anger when you do so. When I hear the word anger, my flesh thinks power. When I hear the word kindness, my spirit thinks greater power. It takes greater power to be provoked and not get angry than it does to get provoked and then get angry. Those who interrogate criminals in our day are often pictured as being rough and mean and forceful. But a chief of police told me that that type of interrogation seldom works. He said what they've discovered is more likely to work is if they're kind to the criminal, he's already feeling guilty, they build a bond with him, and then he opens up and talks. I discussed this with a Christian man who spent several years in different prisons in South America and in the United States. And he said, in the prisons where I was, there were guards who were kind and there were guards who were bullies. And what I would hear in my zone, 60, 70 guys, but they were kind and gave respect to the kind guard, and they would secretly plot to attack the bully guard. And I saw it happen twice while I was in prison. And he said, kindness is what got me through prison. I was usually pretty kind to the other guys, and if I wasn't, then I would apologize, and I always got along with them after that. How did God conquer our hard hearts? With His kindness. Despisest thou the riches of God's goodness and forbearance and longsuffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance? That Greek word for goodness in that verse is the same word translated kind in Ephesians 4:32. God is so good and kind to all of us, even when we're lost and in sin. It's amazing to me that everybody doesn't repent and trust Jesus as their Savior. Titus 3:3 and 4 describes how God's kindness conquers our malice, our envy, and our hatred. Here it is again. Say it again, please. No matter what, be kind. Now, read my points with me. I'll give you the last one, and we'll wind up the message. All right? Number one, use to enhance your own personal testimony. Number two, use to make a positive impact. Number three, use Number four, use as a weapon to defeat bitterness, anger, envy, and vengeance. And you know what? This fifth point is so much in the Bible that I'm amazed I didn't preach on it any more than I did when I was a pastor. Read it, please, all together. Use the power of kindness to repay kindness is shown to you. In Genesis 40, Joseph had been sold by his brothers into slavery. He was sitting in an Egyptian prison. Pharaoh's butler and baker were also in prison and had dreams, and Joseph interpreted their dreams and then said to the butler, but think on me when it should be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh. Bring me out of this house. The butler was restored to his position, but then he forgot all about Joseph. You and I have to remember that just because somebody forgets us doesn't mean that God has forgotten us. In the next chapter, Pharaoh had a dream. When no one in the kingdom could interpret it, the butler said, I do remember my faults this day. It is a fault if someone does something significant for you and you don't repay your debt of kindness to that person. So the butler told Pharaoh about Joseph, and Pharaoh sent and brought Joseph out of prison, and Joseph interpreted his dream, and Joseph wound up as a prince over the entire land of Egypt. One of the biggest and most important things you will do in life is to repay kindnesses done to you. I spent the first 20 years of my life in Gaffney, South Carolina. And several years ago, I was sitting at this restaurant in Gaffney, South Carolina, looked a few tables over and saw Vernon Mullinax sitting there with his wife eating a meal. Who was Vernon Mullinax? He was one of my dad's best friends. And immediately God brought to mind Proverbs 27:10. Thine own friend and thy father's friend forsake not. Wow! God has sent me an opportunity to be a friend to my dad's friend. My dad had gone to heaven about 20 years earlier, so not many of my dad's friends were still alive. I thought of it right away and I thought, I got to do something. And I called the waitress over and I said, ma'am, that table right over there, I said, would you let me have the ticket for that table? And I promise you that you'll get a good tip for this table and that table over there. Christians, when they can, should be generous. You know that? If you're ever struck, I just put a Facebook video on this week of the 2 ways that wise men retain riches, and that is because they fight the selfishness that keeps them from being frugal, and they fight the stinginess that keeps them from being generous. Christians ought to be generous. Anyway, so in a little while we got up, we walked over, and Brother Vernon recognized me right away. Brother Davis, what are you doing? And I shook his hand and I said, Brother Vernon, it's so good to see you. And then I said, I want you to know that your bill is taken care of, your food's paid for, the tip is taken care of, I left her a good tip. You don't have to worry about any of that. He looked at me and he said, Brother Davis, why did you do that? I said, Brother Vernon, you were my dad's friend. And there's a verse in Proverbs that says that your friend and your daddy's friend, you don't forsake them. You don't forget them. I said, y'all went places together. You fooled with cars together. You went soul winning together. You did all kinds of things together. And thank you for being my dad's friend. I gave him a big hug and left there with a heart so full of blessing I didn't even notice I didn't have as much money. Stephen Grillet, American missionary born in 1773, was credited with having made one of the most famous statements of all of time. Read it off the screen with me, everybody. Would you please? I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good, therefore, that kindness I can show to any fellow creature, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. After David killed Goliath, David and Jonathan became best friends. Years later, with Saul and Jonathan both having died on the battlefield, David was the king of Israel and was remembering his friendship with Jonathan. And David said, is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? They called Ziba, who had served Saul, and the king said, is there not yet any of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet. Then King David sent and fetched him out of the house of Machir. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. He's probably frightened out of his wits. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold thy servant. And David said unto him, fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan your daddy's sake, and will restore thee all the land of Saul thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually. So Mephibosheth ate from the king's table for the rest of his life, because David remembered how important it was to be kind to the son of his deceased friend. Dr. Bill Rice continued the story from his life, being a bitter young man trying to go to college during the Great Depression. He said, when we walked back to the house, the dear lady had set the table, and I hungrily ate breakfast, dinner, and supper all at one time. Can you imagine a young man doing that? As I ate, we talked. When I finished my meal, they excused themselves and put down springs and mattresses on the front porch. And the old man said, Bill, you need to get to bed. You got a hard ride ahead of you. And I said, well, I'm going to go to the barn to sleep. And he said, oh no, the son of Will Rice will have the best bed in this house. Ma and I feel it'll be pleasant for us to sleep on the front porch. Then this gray-haired rancher and his wife knelt on the front porch, and in the moonlight, he lifted his head to the sky and prayed. And I fell to my backslidden knees as he prayed for me to have a good night's rest and be glad I had stopped to spend the night with them. I was a very thoughtful young man. As I pulled off my boots, got undressed, and crawled into bed, it seemed I'd hardly fallen asleep when the old man was shaking my shoulder, and he was saying, Bill, you got to get up. It's going to be daylight soon. You got a long ride today. Ma has breakfast almost ready. I rolled out of bed, dressed, walked into the kitchen. Man alive, we had fried chicken, biscuits, and cowboy gravy for breakfast. Then the man brought my horse up to the front gate. The lady had made a number of sandwiches for me to carry. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and said to me, "Bill, takes money to go to college. Imagine you might need a little bit of help. How much money you need for your first term at college?" I couldn't believe my ears. I just met these folks, and here they were trying to give me money, and I told him I didn't want any money from him. And believe it or not, I didn't let him give me a penny, but the old rancher gave me something I needed more than money. I needed confidence that God had not forgotten me. We walked down the path to the front gate. But before I mounted, I tried to thank them for their kindness to me. I looked at him and I said, "Why have you been so good to me?" And the old man said, "Bill, I was just about to tell you about that. Years ago when we came to this place, we invested all the money we had in the down payment. Our children were little. Drought came. Crops dried up. Our herd of cattle wasted away. The bank granted me an extension on the note, but then things went from bad to worse. Finally, they told me I would have to pay or lose the place. I tried to find a job. There was no job to be found. I was desperate. And one day when it seemed like all hope was gone, a tall stranger came riding down that same highway you were on yesterday on a horse. He stopped at the gate just like you did. He said, "Sir, I hear you're in trouble. I hear you're about to lose your ranch. I've come to see if I could help you." I didn't even know that man, but he went with Ma and me to the bank. He sat down in the bank, looked at the banker, and said, "Sir, I believe these are honest people. I believe they will pay you. I want you to give them another chance." And the banker listened to them and gave us another chance. Then we came back from the bank. We got back to the house here, and he said, "Sir, I'd like you to gather your whole family in the living room where I can talk to y'all." They all gathered in the living room, and he said to us, "You know what? You could lose a lot more than the ranch. You could lose your souls if you aren't careful." And that day, he told us about Jesus, what he had done for us, and my whole family became Christians that day because of that cowboy. I was able to not only pay for this ranch, but when each of my children got married, I gave each of them their own ranch. But we would have lost this ranch and our souls had it not been for the stranger who came our way that day. And Bill, he reached and placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Bill, that stranger was your father, Senator Will Rice." Some of the greatest stories you will ever hear are stories where people repay debts of kindness. Are you sowing seeds of kindness that your children may be able to reap someday? Are you repaying others for kindness is done to you in the past? One act of kindness by one old man was so powerful that God used it to transform a young man's life, who in turn became an internationally known evangelist, affecting tens of thousands of other lives, and eventually beginning the Bill Rice Ranch, which is still impacting tens of thousands of lives to this day. In fact, I have a granddaughter who worked at the Bill Rice Ranch this summer. No matter what your problem, but what if? What if the old man had just forgotten? What if the old man had said, we're busy tonight. We don't have time to do anything. No, they had a divine appointment that is still impacting tens of thousands of people. And can you imagine their reward at the judgment seat of Christ? Simply because they did not forget to repay a debt of kindness. No matter what your problem is tonight, your greatest need is to do what that rancher and his family did and trust Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. One more picture. Look at it, would you please? Would you think with me of whoever you may think was the kindest person you have ever met in all your life? May I tell you, he doesn't hold a candle to the Lord Jesus Christ. If Jesus were to walk into this place tonight, what would impress us? The children looking at Him, the smile on His face, the kindness that pervaded His entire being. Would you bow with me, please?